So one of the things that I wanted to do is kind of bring some of the questions that arose from all three of the Zooms from yesterday into what we want to share and talk about today. And I think the first thing I wanted to talk about was I'm really excited about being a part of the Black Agenda group in Rochester, New York, a group of folks. I'm just grateful to be working with folks that have always been doing great work in the community, that are leaders, that are scholars, that are amazing people whom I just have developed as a family for me. And one of the pieces that showed up for us, because the dynamic is so many incredible people weighing in about how COVID is impacting, this whole digital divide. So that was part of it. But then as we began to speak more about what's really going on, and it's not new, but I think we need to change our language around what's going on here. And what we kind of put forth on a live Facebook yesterday was that we all should be looking at racism as a public health crisis. Truly, it is racism. This is not a philosophical crisis. Right. It's a real one. And we have substantial amounts of data that support that idea, that we are looking at a public health crisis, because we can definitely look at the intersection of race and health. And as we talk about disproportionality and we talk about overrepresentation, those words have for some reason become normalized. Mm-hmm. It's almost like, there was a conference that I used to attend.
The overrepresentation conference. It was with community justice. And they would say, see you next year at the overrepresentation conference. And we're like, you looking forward to talking about overrepresentation in the criminal justice system? We're not talking about solving problems. We're basically talking about it like it's
like it's something to be accepted.
Both. Expected and accepted.
Mm-hmm. And it's something that we've normalized. Well, we know that Black people are disproportionately being impacted by COVID. And in some ways, it's like, and
disparities,
and disparities. And we can't continue to look at this like that when we have a preponderance of evidence that looks at how racism negatively impacts the health of Black people. That's, this is not, there's no ambiguity here. There's no confusion, but we have to start looking at, and I want you to think in your mind, how come that's okay? And why we have not, instead of saying, well, since Black people overrepresented, let's do this. Since they're over, how about why are we overrepresented? Right. And how about the systemic pieces that are perpetuating it? And again, we've begun to normalize it. Even as Black people, we begin to accept this as a way of being.
But that's part of us, though. We accept a lot of things that are negative as being just, par for the course of being Black. And so we accept those things. We were talking about these memes that are going around how people get beaten, and if you're not a big woman, you can't cook, and all these things that we have. I mean, there's a little bit of truth to that. But I'm just saying, in general, we shouldn't just accept that this is, that everything that is not like forward thinking, old school. I'm old school. This kind of thing, I'm not going to, in terms of healthy foods, figuring out that you can make really tasty, healthy foods. We don't explore those things because we're so used to accepting that we have high blood pressure and hypertension and stress related and diabetes, and just we're used to these things. So then it's like, here we go again, oh, shoulders bad, all the time. Right. And so we're like, how do we start to inspire people to talk about, like, you actually have some control in this situation, especially in your own homes.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have to reconcile yourself. It's like when we were talking last time about, and a lot of people, I'm sure a lot of folks here work with youth in the community or on one level or another. And we talked about how one of the youth that Bahia was working with, came to our house for Thanksgiving. And at that time, what I started to think about in terms of self-efficacy and what that means to have self-efficacy. And I talked about the whole idea of learned helplessness. Did I talk about that last week? So this is what happens. I've had
too many calls.
Too many of these calls. But anyway, just to reiterate, if you've already heard it, is this whole idea of learned helplessness and how you thwart it, as opposed to accept, folks just, don't know how or don't feel like. So let me give you an example of learned helplessness. Learned helplessness came out of originally animal studies, and the original one was with dogs. And they took these dogs and they put them in kind of a caged area where they could, there was a little light bulb, which was red. And when they would turn on the red light bulb, they would electrify wherever the dog was in the cage. And immediately the dogs would run across to the other part of the cage that wasn't electrified. And after a while, they have what is known as conditioned response. In other words, they're responding without the reinforcement of the electricity. So the light comes on, the dog moves, even though there's no shock. Then they decided, let's see what happens if we just shock the dog.
Inhumane.
Well, of course, it's inhumane, but they would shock the dog, regardless of whether the light came on or not, and regardless of where the dog was in the cage. And what the dog eventually does is the dog will lie down and stop moving altogether, because what the dog has, quote, learned is that it cannot change the outcome, no matter what it does. And so they started to take a look at learned helplessness in human beings. And human beings can also have learned helplessness. And when you start looking at the oppressive policies, the systemic racism, all of these things that have gone on for generations, there are people who have what is known as learned helplessness. Now, what I don't agree with is that this is a condition for which one should reconcile oneself. And I've heard and looked in the literature about that. And I'm going, well, there's also learned self-efficacy, right? So I'm promoting this notion of self-efficacy, where people need to know that they can affect change in their environment. For example, let's just say that there's a door, and the door for many years has been guarded by people, and anyone that walked near the door would be beaten down or killed. This goes on over time. And then finally, there's no one at the door. The door may even still be locked, but there's no one at the door, and still no one approaches the door. In fact, it gets to the point where not only is there no one at the door, not only is the door not locked, it is ajar. And then you start hearing people going, there's no reason. Why would I want to go out there? There's probably nothing over there anyway. Or, only certain kind of people.
You act white if you go to that.
You go act white if you go to that. All the different reasons. And here's what we do in a system that really perpetuates these kinds of disparities. They go, well, I know. Let's do a survey.
Oh, God.
Okay, so now we're going to survey the people about the door. And then we're going to do a blind study of the survey and comparing it to, and then after a while you have just studied the death out of it, right? Saying, but what the reason why we're studying it is so we can better help people learn self-efficacy and so they'll walk through the door. So here's something. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's particularly all that, provocative. How about you grab someone by the hand and go, hey, come on, let's try to walk through the door.
See your hand.
Hand over here. Grab someone by the hand and walk through the door. And immediately they experience self-efficacy.
It's being modeled for them. And if you're not getting shocked as you go to the door, that's a lot more of a, what is that? Oh,
we're always looking at people.
I'm sorry, look at the window.
We're looking out the window, looking at people doing something strange. You got to pay attention to this kind of stuff. So the other piece to self-efficacy is learn self-helplessness, or this whole idea of feeling like I can't walk through the door. There's something called vicarious learned helplessness, which means that if you are a person I admire and respect, if you're a parent, if you're a person in leadership, or if you're a person who has always had power in my world, and you don't walk through the door, and I think, you're my mentor, then I'm not going to try to walk through the door. Right. But the opposite is also true. If this person that I love and respect walks through the door, then I believe I can walk through the door. And the way you actually exercise change and help and efficacy is sometimes just don't even talk about it. say, come, let me take your hand.
Yeah,
Let's walk through the door together.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't require any of that. You don't need to study the study. You don't need to do any of that. But the willingness to do that, most folks don't have. Yeah. We live on the misery index. We live on the fact that people are suffering, and we're living and making livings off of that suffering. And so if we want people to really learn self-efficacy and not dependency, then we need to look at the variables that are in play that produce that. That makes sense to me, because I'm a person that really does believe in science. I do believe, that we have to look at real, viable evidence that something works.
But also the never try, never fail mentality, because even if it's that I don't necessarily believe that I'm going to fail, that something bad is behind the door, but I know that I'm safe not doing anything if I don't try. I have to feel the experience of potential failure if I don't attempt to walk to the door. It's like I couldn't have done it. Maybe I could have if I wanted to, right? But I know for sure that I won't feel this sense of failure if I try and I'm not successful. Exactly. And getting people to understand that the trying is the part of you that you need to grow, the part that's inspired to actually try to do something different. That's the part that...
And what I wanted to talk about, because I want to get back to this whole idea of viewing racism as, you all may have remembered when they decided that violence was a public health issue.
Yeah, I remember that.
Remember that when it actually got added as a public health issue. And it was okay because from their vantage point, the violence was about people of color. So we could do that because that's y'all, right? But how obvious at this juncture in our evolution in America, how obvious is it that you have a direct relationship and a direct intersection between race and those disparities? So we have to begin to look at racism and call it out as one of the most severe public health crises that we've encountered in this country. And looking at the social determinants of health, one of the things that I think happen in our worlds. Like, for example, I remember my son, my youngest son, who's married with children, living in Portland. Portland, God help us. Portland had what was known as a no-cause eviction.
No fault.
No cause eviction. It doesn't matter what it is. We can evict you because you have red hair. It don't matter. And you have no recourse. Right. So the point of it is you can't say, oh my God, you're being racist, you're being discriminatory. Right. They say we don't care because there's no fault, no cause. You can't bring up anything that says that we can't do it. So after the second time of being displaced this way, my son, because of course we know the communities that people are being displaced in because they're being gentrified, right? And so my son was like, put my kids in school, and then, I'm sorry, you have this much time to leave. And, it would just really upset him. And I said to him, that, there's one thing you could do to stop that from happening. Mm-hmm. Own your house. Okay. Now, I'm not just saying that, willy-nilly. I am saying that one of the social determinants of health is home ownership. I'm not making this up. So they've been able to literally connect the amount of time, if a family owns their home, how long they've owned their home, and whether their children as adults will become ill, and their life expectancy.
The way that they did that was they talked about the fact that when you have a high power or actually low power jobs that have high stress. So like you have little control over what you can do with that job, and you have a high stress situation. Right. And then you also live in a house where at any moment a landlord could raise the rent or come in, or the manufacturers can do, they can come in and say, we're going to come and do some work on your house. And you have maintenance folks. That creates a certain level of anxiety over time. And so what they found is that if they take children who were raised in a house where they knew that this is our house, no one can raise the rent, no one can, come in here and, tell us we have to get out, that when they released a cold virus into the air in a room, that the people who are more likely to get the colds and ultimately get sick were the people who, as children, didn't live in homes where their parents owned it. Now, part of what that is psychological. So you can tell your child you own the house.
I say tell them I own it.
This is our house. they come in there consulting with us. This is our house.
Also, I always tell people, if you're traveling, put doctor on it.
Oh yeah.
Just say,
oh yeah, doctor.
And it's sick, it's twisted, but you're treated differently when you have the word doctor.
And they're not going to check. Only thing is, if somebody has a heart attack, they might be looking for you.
Well, you can say I'm not that kind of a doctor. So, but no, really, truly, it becomes really important. And what we're talking about, looking at home ownership as a proxy to determine not only life expectancy, but your actual health as adults, is we're looking at stability, aren't we? We're looking at self-efficacy, because a child is saying, mom and dad are the people that are, for the vantage point of the kid, God. Right. They're like God to them. They're the ones that provide for them, feed them, take care of them. And by the way, it makes sense when people are always trying to get children and their family to really embrace spiritual practices.
Right.
They're asking them to embrace spiritual practices, live and move a certain way, and to obey a God they cannot see.
Right.
And a good proxy for understanding whether or not they can embrace that is if they embrace their parents.
Right.
Because if they don't embrace and respect the parents who feed them, clothe them, give them housing, then they will never, ever accept a God they cannot see.
Right.
So people don't understand that we are actually,
or laws,
or laws, right?
Rules at school. Let's go.
So one of the pieces, the other thing that we were able to look at, a social determinant of health, is where you live, right? Mm-hmm. And I think I talked about so many Zoom calls, but I've talked about the fact that they have been able to map out literally where people live in certain parts of the United States. If you live in a certain state, where you live within that state, and they can determine based on where you live, how long you will live. Mm-hmm. How long your life expectancy is connected to that. Now let's talk about why that's so. And I think I talked about before, the whole idea is that if you get in a car, you're doing a road trip, you get off and you're trying to find a restaurant in a little neighborhood. You find yourself driving through and you see McDonald's and you see Popeyes and you see Burger King, you see Taco Bell, and you see all of these fast food restaurants. You can actually pretty much figure out who lives in that neighborhood. Right? Then you can keep driving. And when you keep driving, you find yourself running into the Olive Garden, the Red Lobster, a little bit better. And then you can pretty much figure out who's living in that neighborhood. Right. And then if you move a little further and you start seeing some high-end restaurants and these boutique restaurants and these little tea shops, you can pretty much know who's living there. So it doesn't seem so strange when you understand access. Right. Access. So I start to look at,
and where if you're starting with Safeway or
or if you have a restaurant where who, first of all, who can shop at Whole Foods. That's why I started an organic garden. I was just mad about the idea of an $8 cabbage. Anyway, so I'm looking at the fact that these disparities that we see, which is the point of this what we're looking at today, and looking at the impact racism has had. I remember when I moved to Portland. And I would talk to Black people, because I noticed, all the Black people lived in what was known as the Albina area.
Yeah, Albina.
And so I would ask Black people, why do you live in the Albina area? And he kind of looked around and went, that's where all the Black people are, right? So, okay, so why do you think all the Black people are there?
You're moving out of the range. I didn't do it. See, somebody said earlier that I was pushing her. I was actually trying to put her more in this frame because she was easing her way out.
Yeah. So we're close. So it's so weird. It's a weird thing. But so the thing about it is when you start looking at where Black people exist in cities throughout the United States, these are cities where, for example, Black people in Portland didn't realize that was the only place you could live in Portland. It was literally designated that's where the Black people coming in, working for Kaiser, when Kaiser came in, and they were in these, makeshift little housing, temporary housing. Same thing happened in Oakland, various parts of the country. And you start seeing that in those areas, you have industrial waste, you have chemical dumping, you have people building temporary housing atop literally dumps, garbage dumps. So you start looking at the poisons. In Louisiana, for example, which is one of the most toxic states in the United States, remember that that Louisiana is below, New Orleans is below sea level.
Right.
Why would you dump anything in New Orleans? Why would you do that? You're literally living with this. They have forms of cancer coming out of places in Oakland, in Louisiana, that they've not seen anywhere else.
Right.
I have a really good friend that works for, she's at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. And we were actually in Brooklyn, New York, and we were going to dinner. And on the menu was Louisiana, some kind of Louisiana dish. Don't know what it was. Could have been fish or who knows. And I said, oh, wow, I think I'll have that. My family's from Louisiana. I kind of like spicy food kind of thing. And she just turns and looks at me and she goes, I don't eat anything with Louisiana in the title. she goes, I won't. Now, she's worked for 20 years at the Center for Disease Control. And that's when she began to tell me.
Listen, I lived in Louisiana. And I will say, although I love my people, I don't even know how we survived in that space. I will say that there are several friends of mine whose parents came down with random cancers. Nobody knew what they were. Brain cancers they couldn't figure out root cause for. One woman just stopped being able to walk. I mean, things like that happen so often there that I was like, what? How you mean you don't know? You don't know?
Yeah, and now we have to take a look at that behavior, which is not new. Yeah, I mean, come on. A lot of people, so when we start looking at where Black people live, right, where we have been forced to live, right. It's not like everybody voted, let's go live we're going to all move to Albina. That's not what happened, right? Yeah. And again, people don't know their history, so they don't even know why they are where they are.
Right.
So it's really important for us to connect this. Again, root cause is racism. The root cause of that is racism, right? So when we look at COVID, we're also looking at the very same thing when we start, again, normalizing certain disparities. And like I said, I really do believe that racism is a pre-existing condition. It is, Question.
Just Michael Westmoreland. He's talking about his daughters just finished your book, and he's interested in finding out how you can help them heal from the hurt and pain being Black and female in the United States.
Here's the thing. The one thing I don't want this work to ever suggest, one of the difficulties when I wrote Post-Traumatic, and for those of you that aren't familiar with the book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, there it is right there. Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. And when I wrote the book, and I'm getting ready to do an audio book.
Call me Vanna Black.
Vanna Black, Lord have mercy. So one of the issues when I was speaking to some of my colleagues and people who scholars that I just have a great deal of respect for, the danger in writing Post-Traumatic was whether or not the book itself would pathologize Black people and therefore give people who are racist a reason to further discriminate or denigrate or what have you. Well, I wrote the book in 2005. That's not the case. The book has had a totally different impact because I'm injured doesn't mean I'm inferior. Because I'm injured or because even I've experienced trauma does not suggest I'm less than anyone else or that it's even my fault. Right. Nor does it suggest that as a result of that trauma, we just stopped.
Right.
We didn't. We have been able to thrive in spite of it, right? So I think it's really important to send the message of resilience to our children. And there's a really great article. I don't know if we put it up.
The Do You Know one?
No, not the Do You Know one. What I'm saying is that when we talk about resilience and we start looking at our children, the article I was thinking about was preventing the intergenerational transmission of trauma. And the author's name is Herum, Herum. And one of the things that is done, one of the ideas that were put forth is to produce a narrative about your family, about you. And the most important part of that narrative is regardless of whether trauma has happened, you can say, but we are still here and we're intact. And to understand, and this is one of the things that I told my grandchildren, I think I spoke about before. I actually got all my grandchildren together and I got my grandnieces and nephews. And I said, I want 2 days with them. And in those 2 days, I produced a book for each of them. And in those books was information, quotes, inspirational things, spiritual things, scientific reality, everything I could, I wanted to put in there, that as they move through their lives, they will eventually go back and see those things. But I sat and I talked to them and I asked them a question. I said, have you ever seen on television when there's a hurricane or a tornado? And on the news, I said, they said, oh yeah. I said, you know how they show the reporter getting blown away and falling down and leaves and stuff blowing around them in the middle of a hurricane. And inevitably they said, oh yeah. I said, do you remember what it looked like when the reporters went back after the storm? And I said, okay, for example, what do you see when the storm is happening? So we see things flying everywhere as a hurricane and, maybe it's a tornado, things are whipping around. I said, do you remember the trees? Oh, yeah, the trees are flipping back and branches are flying. I said, and then afterwards, they will bring you back to
I'm making the girl come down.
That. What?
I'm making the girl come down. Keep going.
Making the girl come down. I'm telling you. See, this is what I'm saying.
This is the thing I realized. We were going to have her come down next week, but she won't be with us.
That's right.
Right? Okay, really quickly, a break in the tornado story, and then we'll be right back to the tornado story. Come here, child. Over here. No, right here. This is generation 3. So you got her, you got me, and you got her. This is Naime, the lovely and talented. Well, we brought her in here, and the reason why I brought her in here just now was because we were just talking to the man about how we are building resilience in young girls considering post-traumatic. Right. And one of the things that I'd like to say, get back in the frame.
I did it. I saw it.
You saw that happening? Okay. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we like to say is that when we start thinking about the changes that you can make in looking at your trauma, the level of experience of trauma, and what you pass on to your children in terms of resilience. That's why I wanted to bring her in.
I see.
So mom, lovely and talented Dr. Joy Degruy, had a little bit more traumatic experience in life as a girl growing up in South Central Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
She's got some stuff that she's been working on and looking at that is a little odd. And then, thank goodness, she raised me. Thank you. She is beautiful. Isn't she? She is. Thank you. Then she raised me with a lot less trauma, of course, than what she experienced. And now the things that we're doing with with my daughter, it's so amazing because she kind of let me know that, I could do things, that I had the potential to do things. And that was like exciting, right? Because I still was isolated culturally. Right. I still was experiencing racism and things like that. But then I have this one, math science genius, nowhere near my skill set at all. But not only does she believe she can do something because she wasn't raised with the trauma that I was raised with or that she was raised with, because I was raised with a little tiny bit of trauma. She was raised with a lot of bit of trauma. Yes. And so her raising me with not a lot of trauma. I've never had a spanking in my life. This one's never had a spanking in her life. My mother wasn't spanked as a child.
That's correct.
So we have 3 generations of not being spanked. And this goes to us talking earlier about people are like, well, that's just how Black people are. If you're not spanking your child, they're going to end up in jail, blah, blah. None of us have ever gone to jail. Right. So far. Right. Nobody gone to jail.
We're doing okay.
But no spanking, right? So we found a way to engage folks in a way. And this girl, she's got a scholarship to the PhD. Mm-hmm. Can't say that happened for any of us.
Nope.
All the way there. She's 14 years old. So introduce yourself. Say who you are.
Hi, I'm Naime.
What grade?
And you go to, let's go.
I go to Grant High School, freshman, and 14.
Anyway.
So she was one of the people that received one of the books. Remember the book I made for you? Mm-hmm. Right. So in there, I was telling them the story when I had them all together and their parents trusted me to have them for 2 days. I had them for 2 days. And during that, even the little one, Zufan was there, the little bitty one, and she retained a lot of the information. We have another super interesting, bright, brilliant child. Yeah. Anyway, so what, and more important, I keep saying bright, everybody's happy. I said, but what's most important to me about my children and my grandchildren is that they're kind, that they're loving, that they're happy, and they help others. That is what I'm most proud of, that they're good people. And they have good hearts. Mm-hmm. So when I was talking to them about the trees blowing in the storm, I said, you notice that some trees get blown away? And they said, yes. I said, so the trees that are left standing, when they go back to that same space, those trees that are still standing. I said, what's the difference between those trees and the ones that were blown away? Well, these are a pretty bright group of kids. Mm-hmm. And they said, well, because they probably were stronger. I said, what made them stronger? Mm-hmm. They said, well, they probably had strong roots. Uh-huh. I said, but what made them have strong roots? And so there's this quiet for a moment. I said, because of storms. Mm-hmm. And the bottom line is life brings us storms. And the more they had to struggle with these storms, the stronger their roots were. Mm-hmm. So it's not about being afraid of the tests and the difficulties and the vicissitudes that happen in our lives, but to see what is the lesson here. What does this teach us so that we can strengthen ourselves and have strong roots so no one or nothing can move us and literally blow us away. Mm-hmm. So again, I had a responsibility as the elder, as a grandparent, to impart that wisdom and to help them understand, fall you will, because the storm is going to come. The key is getting back up. Mm-hmm. And the key is learning from what blew you away. Because if you don't learn from it, noted COVID, if you don't learn that we are a world and that we do need to care about the people in the other countries and the person next door and down the street and in that other community, right. If you don't learn that, trust me, another storm is coming, and it will be harder and more fierce than the one we have experienced with COVID. So it's important for us to get the lesson. And I have to say, what I'm wonderful piece for me in all of this is doing this and doing the other Zooms with people is folks get it. They really do. The problem is the people in leadership don't.
Right. But no major change has ever happened because the people in leadership decide they're going to give us a chance. But it's the nice thing.
That is correct.
It is always us on the bottom that band together and say, we're not taking this anymore. We're not going to keep eating what you're feeding us, and we're going to do something different. We talked about this. Somebody mentioned it yesterday that my South African teacher in college, my professor, he's talked about ukukulambisa. He said it's I was this wrong, but it's a Xhosa word for how to outsmart your oppressor. And so the idea is always figuring out. He grew up under apartheid with a Zulu and a Xhosa mom, and that was a really a difficult union. But also being in under
because
apartheid,
of
tribalism. But in apartheid, how they were able to navigate that. And so for us, we're trying to figure out that kind of navigation, but also infusing that with joy. Joy and resilience has always kept us moving. And so we're not jealous of one.
And one of the things when Bahia talks about not passing along my injury or and then passing it along to her children, I wanted to talk about something that appeared innocuous to me that my mother used to make me do. So, and I think I have so many Zooms, I can't remember who it is, but in my house, there were a couple of things you couldn't do. First of all, my mother grew up in Louisiana. Let me say that. My mother died when she was 57 years old. So she died, fairly young. Actually, my mom and dad died young. But anyway, my mom, the one thing you had better never do is come to pick up any one of her daughters and blow the horn. Okay? I would tell people, hey, don't blow the horn, no matter what. Sit out there, do whatever you got to do, because we didn't have cell phones. But don't you blow that horn, because from my mother growing up in Louisiana, I didn't know why, but all I knew was don't blow the horn.
Right.
I could sit down now. My mother's not alive, so I can't ask her. But I think about, and I remember her connecting that with people blowing for women and prostitutes.
It's called the whole honky thing
in the red light district or whatever, but you're not going to do that with my daughters. The second thing that my mother would just absolutely, get totally undone about is if you were walking through the door, eating something, she would see you and go, don't walk through the door eating, sit down, right? This is what my mother would tell me. And I would go, okay, so I knew, I had this, it was visceral. Don't ever walk out the door eating something. So Bahia,
keep moving out the frame.
I was moving on. Bahia, this one, I told her, and she was in high school. I think.
Listen, you can't raise a child to ask questions and then be surprised when they ask you a question.
That is absolutely correct. I'm not mad at her. Although I got in my feelings for a minute. So what happened was Bahia was about your age. She was walking out of the door eating a sandwich or something. And I said, hey, Don't walk out the door. What are you doing? Walking out the door eating. Sit down. And she would say, she said to me, she stopped, she goes, well, why? And I said, I thought about it. I said, because you don't do that. I said, it's inappropriate to do. Don't do it. Mm-hmm. See, that's one thing about my family. We can say things as though it really makes sense. But
we just offer our opinion like it's fact.
Like it's absolute fact.
Fervent.
It's just fervent. And I said, you don't do that. It's inappropriate. And so, of course, Bahia went,
why?
Why is it inappropriate? I'm going, you just don't do that. And she goes, but why don't you do it? There are cafes outside. We have barbecues. I said, because I said so. Just don't do it. Right?
I was like, okay.
So then after that, I had to check myself because I was going, why can't we?
Right. What's the foundation of this?
Years went by because my mother's passed away. I can't ask her. Mm-hmm. So I was with my sister in Chicago and I was doing a talk at, I think, the University of Chicago. Anyway, there was a man in the audience. I told that story along with the tomato story, right? So I told that story and, everybody, 4 tomatoes.
Oh yes.
4 tomatoes. So anyway, there's some real classic stories in the family. So I was telling the story. I got off the stage. I was greeting people and a man, an older gentleman came up to me and he asked me, how old my mother would be. And I told him, he says, well, that's how old I am. And I grew up in New Orleans. He says, and I think I know why your mother told you that. And he said, when we grew up during segregation. Mm-hmm. And so there were restaurants that would have a sign in the window that said no colored seating, which means that you could go in and get your food, mm-hmm. but you'd have to either stand and eat it or carry it out to eat it.
Right.
And he says, and I think maybe when your mother saw you doing that, it triggered in her the humiliation she felt. And she was basically saying to you, we don't have to do that anymore. Right. You can sit down and you can eat. And again, this is something where it's, it was fairly innocuous. I don't know that it would hurt or harm a child to say, don't eat walking out the door. But it's important for us to make sense of our lives and why we do the things we do and how we move through the world. And to understand that as we transmit that healthy way of thinking, even the exploration of why we do what we do, we change the trajectory.
Right.
We're hoping to change the trajectory that, that harm, the injury. Mm-hmm. And I tell people tell me all the time, they say, God, how did you write post-traumatic? I said, I didn't have to leave the house.
Well, part of it also is like little things that you don't think are a big deal. Like I grew up with yelling, which I didn't think was that big a deal because I didn't get spanked. So yelling was, and I didn't think about the fact that it did cause me a little bit of anxiety. So I am a yelling person. I will yell. Would you say I yell?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm trying. But I'm doing better.
Do you trying to do better?
Oh, tell them how you really feel.
No pressure.
Okay.
No pressure.
So the point is, I'm trying to pay attention to my intonation because my kids would say, "Are we in trouble? Am I in trouble?" If I'm looking intensely at something, they're like, "Mom always looks mad." You guys tell me that I always look. What? But I'm not a mad person. But so these are things that I'm aware they're getting kind of. This experience that they're having that's not necessarily intentional for me, but it's something that I'm trying to pay attention to. Because again, I don't lose anything from trying to better myself.
Right.
That doesn't make me a worse parent because I'm trying to pay attention to some things. And sometimes my kids, my son used to tell me, that's not encouraging. That's bad parenting. I was like, really? How are you going to tell me it's bad parenting? But still, like, being able to take some of those things in has really been helpful. And they're insightful and they have wisdom of their own. That they can impart. Now we ain't friends. That's my child. She wanted to be my homie, but she's not. We ain't friends. But I like her. I like her. And I think the other piece to one of the things I got off the phone with my mentor, Dr. Edwin Nichols. We were on the phone for an hour just now talking. She was yell talking.
And I was yell talking. But, what I appreciate, when I have these exchanges or if I talk to Dr. Nichols about things, Ed is recommending books for me and we're talking about what's going on right now. And I think it's just really important for us to look at this situation from a broader perspective and begin to build what it is we want. That's why I have that tagline, be the healing you want. That means that you have to begin to check your own behavior and to be willing to take a look at that and to say, is this something that's useful that I want to continue? Or is it something I need to alter or change or just rid myself of altogether? And again, I think that every family, every person, nobody's perfect. All of us, and like I said, that's why I'm saying the playing field has been leveled here. And Ed is, he's sheltered in place, and he's talking about his experience and his family. And there's something that's unifying about this process. And at the same time, it's hopeful. It's not, we're not giving up. We've been through worse, although I think there's some major storms coming in. Everybody knows me, and I'm going to say it. And it's true. Because if we don't get it, if you don't learn the first time, when it comes around,
it's stronger and more intense.
It's been eating Wheaties.
So here, your test. Okay, so we're gonna we are closing our little session.
It's
it's about to be 6:30.
Okay.
So, but we're gonna go back, and I don't know who the person was talking about. Trump was not.
No, that's not what it was. She was talking about how she cleans the restaurant.
Oh yeah, she was talking. No, but I'm saying she asked earlier. Someone asked earlier about talking about leaving a hotel cleaner than you found it.
Yeah, that was the other thing.
Yeah. Just being she's talking about just family things that kind of you learn that you have to do extra. You have to work harder, you have to clean more, you have to do all these things. And I think that creates an undue amount of stress that's on us in terms of every day that we live. Doing all double time what everybody else does is not, it's going to deplete you. But anyway, I want to go through and say, look at what people's comments and questions before we end for today.
I would say to everyone there to tell your stories to your children. Tell your stories growing up. Tell about things that you did wrong and how you changed them. Because I was surprised when we talked to a bunch of youth in Nashville, and they said, everybody's always telling us that we need to go and we need to find more spiritually based solutions to some of the things we're doing, but we don't know where to look. Tell us where to look. Tell us how to do these things. And when we have a problem as a young person, don't shame us for having the problem. Right. And again, they go to the adults that they go to for help, and they get shamed.
Right.
Nobody wants to be shamed. So we have to be able to deal with the fact that none of us are perfect. None of us have arrived. Like I said, we've all just agreed to take the trip. That's all, but none of us have arrived. And we can all learn. And that's the other thing about me, is that I will learn. And then, I'm 62 years old, and I love learning new things like Uno. Oh God. Didn't I just learn Uno?
I wouldn't even say that out loud. Here's the deal though. We did start getting on some word game. I don't know what it is. We're addicted to it. And she's so competitive.
Oh, wait a minute. Did you hear what she said? Oh my God. I'm like, who are you?
Listen, I think healthy competition is a good thing. Anyway, we play a lot of games, and we have a good time.
We
together.
do.
But anyway, we wanted the reason why we do this is that more than anything, not taking yourself, your life too seriously, in the sense that everything is, because we have a lot of stresses by people. We don't need to look far.
We don't.
To find things that we could be frustrated with, irritated with, angry about, petty. All those things can come about. But you just feel so much better when you just literally sit in a state of gratitude. Literally, no matter what. Just, even if you got this eye melts off, you got this eye.
Exactly. You got to figure it out.
Just focusing on what is good.
And to never think for a moment, like I was talking to someone it was a radio show. I'll never forget this. So I was on a radio show, and it was a lot of African Americans were dialing in and calling in. And this one man called and he said, "Yeah, you don't know. You talking, you don't know. We didn't come from the same place. So you talking about all this." And I just sat down and I just listened to him. I said, you know what? You need to know your audience. I said, you don't know what's happened to me. And I kind of rolled out some of the things that, my family has endured and I have endured. I'm not ashamed of them. There have been difficulties. I said, but please don't make an assumption about me. Don't make that assumption about, the way I have had to walk through the world, because you have no idea. I said, so know your audience. And at the end of the conversation, when I talked about my life and my family and some of the struggles, he said, I'm sorry. He said, I apologize. I didn't know. I said, right. I said, because, so many of us, you look at folks and you go, oh, well, they have it this way, and you just really don't know what people have gone through. So appreciate that, and don't be quick to judge. And I would say to all the people that are adults, that are older, please be willing to learn, to change. It doesn't take anything away from you to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. It doesn't change your place and the love that folks have for you. But we have to be willing to learn and grow. If I'm asking her to learn and grow, I have to learn and grow.
Right.
I can't say, well, I just, don't tell me what to do. I'm the elder here. I mean, and I've heard that kind of thing. And we can't do that. We can't afford to. We're all, so long as you have breath, you're learning and you're growing mentally, emotionally, and spiritually and physically. So,
so that's been fun. It's been fun again. Another Wellness Wednesday.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we'll convince the girl to come back with us.
That's right.
She does like spending time with us, but here, get in a little closer so you can show them the lovely smile. Look at all the generations.
Oh, we love it.
We love it. But anyway, we love you guys, and thank you. And so happy that I get to have my mom here with me, and I'm hoping that you are with the people that you love. And if you're not, that you think about them, or you call them, write them a letter or a note to let them know that you're thinking about them. All right?
Okay.
We'll see you all later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Be well.
Yes, be really well. Be really well.